My name is Bill Bliss, and I am one of the founding members of the Teams effort, and I'm the platform architect, and I head up the developer ecosystem, helping our developers create applications for Microsoft Teams. And without further ado, let's dive in. So what we're going to talk about today we're going to be talking about some line of business app scenarios, as well as talking about how those applications are built on top of the Microsoft Teams platform. I'm going to give you a demo of the Contoso HR line of business app that we're going to be showing screenshots from throughout the presentation. It's actually live code. It's fake live code, but it's real code running in Azure, and so you can actually see it for yourself. And then we'll save some time at the end for Q&A. So let's start with the idea, or the question of why should enterprise developers build line of business, LOBs for short, applications for Teams. And the idea is that we think Teams is a great place for enterprise-specific solutions for enterprise end users to use the applications they already have today that are integrated with their existing internal systems and processes in the context of Teams and Teams and channels and collaborating with everyone in your company. So here's some examples of some categories of some things that we think are natural fits for line of business apps. So we've got things like departmental tools, developer operations for admins, sales dashboards, recruiter tools, employee resources, benefits, time and absence reporting, employee profile information, support and information like IT help desk, company information, new employee onboarding, and then of course, processes and workflow, things like approvals and ticket management and so forth. And so we think that's probably broader than that, but we wanted to kind of summarize what we think some of the interesting scenarios are into some of these categories. But really, this is very early days with respect to line of business apps and Teams, as you'll find out. And so really, it's really all up to you and the rest of the developer community out there to kind of flesh out what these scenarios really are. We have a few examples today, and I've listed a few of them. So a company that I've worked with, Micro Focus, the software assets of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise were spun off into a separate company and merged with Micro Focus and a while ago. And HPE Micro Focus has a really interesting initiative called ChatOps, which is the practice of doing developer operations, things like troubleshooting and managing server operations and so forth, inside chat space. So rather than having have it be a place that you talk about the work that gets done, it's actually where the work is done, and everyone gets to see what work is being done when it's being done, and that's in customer pilots right now. A company in the UK named Flex AI, they've created a set of bots for creating and managing teams, the concierge, how do I do X, or I want to do X, and those are available today. That's kind of a custom thing when you work with them, in the sense that it's customized for your own company. Another company that I work with is called Bentley Systems, and I personally had never heard of them before we started working together, but they're actually a billion-dollar software company largely headquartered in the Midwest, and they create project management and construction software for managing really large construction projects, things like bridges and dams and large skyscrapers, things like that. And they manage complex construction projects across locations, roles, and time. Inside Microsoft, we built a few tools. The ones that we use inside our team, one of them is called Proximus. We have all of the Office and Azure products use an internal tool for managing live site incidents called Incident Management, ICM, and we have a bot called Proximus that it's not muted. We have a bot called Proximus that is used to integrate with chat so that people don't have to actually use the tool as much. A team at Office created a cool app called Teams Debug, where you could actually file a bug into Visual Studio right within the chat, which is pretty cool. You can even it even picks up screenshots and things. A bot that myself and another developer inside our effort, we call it MicroStack, and it's an internal Stack Overflow app for posting things. So Microsoft has, there's a lot of people don't know this, but there's a corporate version of Stack Overflow. It's the same as the one on the web, but it's used for companies to use internally for internal tools, private APIs, pre-production releases, and so forth. And we wanted a way to, the way it works is, you know, when a team that owns a particular component has a question from somewhere else in Microsoft, they want to know that they have a question. And so we created this MicroStack bot where you can go and subscribe to any number of tags, and anytime there's a question or an answer on a question with that tag, you get a post in the channel so you can see it. And that's actually how we manage our internal questions on Teams. There's a kind of a what I call a hybrid line of business app, and that's actually and Flex AI might be kind of this as well. But the idea is that there are companies out there that are SaaS companies that actually manage multiple companies, but the installation is actually it's customized for that company. So Kronos, for example, does shift scheduling and vacation and sick time management. We expect that to be, you know, hopefully coming out this month. Things that are actually in our store today are apps called Tala, which is kind of an internal IT help desk product. Sappho, which is a Sappho and Yellow Ant are both, you know, automation tools, kind of like you know, Zapier or Flow, but integrated in the case of Sappho with your internal systems. So anyway, those are some examples of some line of business apps that are out there today. It's still very new, and there's some things that we need to do, which I'll talk about shortly, that will make using them and building them and deploying them and managing them easier. So it all starts, though, with the Teams platform, and I'm not going to cover this in a lot of detail here because we're going to go into a little bit more detail on each of these going forward. But what I wanted to mention is that there's a number of different things, and they all kind of serve different purposes, and they're all unified into a single concept of an app, which we'll talk about. The developer documentation, which I'm responsible for, is at the bottom, aka.ms/teamsdevdocs. And that's up there now. And by the way, all the docs are open source, and you can actually, you know, if you find you need mistakes or anything like that, you can actually comment on it right there within GitHub. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using a hypothetical recruiting tool for human resources, the Contoso HR app. So, and I'm actually going to demo this at the end. But the idea is there's an app that is used for managing positions, people applying for interviews, managing open positions, managing interviews, the offer process, and so forth, and so forth. And that's this Contoso HR app. So here's an example of the Contoso HR app and using Microsoft Teams tabs. So what is a tab? Well, a tab inside Teams is a rich surface area for your line of business app. And what's cool is that it actually is just, if you have an existing web app, it's very simple, a matter of hours or days to get it up and going inside Teams. And it's used for team and personal productivity, which I'll show you shortly. And here's an example of a list of applicants to a job position. So I'm in the Contoso IT team, and we've created a hiring channel. And the team is looking to hire a senior software engineer. And all the team members, or many of them, are collaborating and helping on trying to fill this role. And so at a glance, they can see, okay, what's the position we're hiring for? How many people have applied? How many people have been screened? How many people have been interviewed? Who are the active applicants? Who's the hiring team? And so forth. And so the idea is that you can create, at a glance, people can see all this stuff instead of having to know right now, how many open positions are there, and which ones we're hiring for, and who's interviewed who, and so forth, and what does the interview feedback look like. This app doesn't exist. I wish it did, because this is something that we inside Microsoft spend a ton of time on managing, and especially with teams, because we're growing very quickly. You know, trying to find great people to help with building the team's product. As I mentioned earlier, Teams can be used for both team and personal productivity. So what you saw earlier is what we call a channel tab, and the idea there is, you know, a user can configure the view based on the channel context. So if you think of what is a channel in the abstract, it's basically a shared context for a set of people. It could be a sub-team, it could be a special interest group, it could be a project, it could be a customer, it could be really anything, but it creates a context for a set of people to work together on. And in this case, it's like I said, the IT team, and there's the hiring channel, like you saw earlier. And this way, they're all collaborating on trying to hire people for the team, and this is how this actually sets the context for it. And so a tab just extends the conversational context to other things that people collaborate on for that area. Now, one thing that's important to understand is that, generally speaking, almost always, the content should be the same for all users. And if you think about it, it makes sense. It wouldn't make sense for everyone to see something different in a shared context, because then if you're commenting on it, you're going to be commenting on something that somebody else can't see. Now, there are a few exceptions. A good one, actually, is our own Microsoft Teams education product. And in that case, each student sees that we have the assignments tab, and the students see their own individual assignments, but the teacher sees the entire class's assignments. And of course, that makes sense. And in that case, you wouldn't expect the students to be necessarily collaborating on their own. They wouldn't be asking questions about their own assignment. They would be asking questions about the assignment itself. And that would be the collaboration context. We went ahead on accident here. There's also a personal tab, which I'll show you quickly, and that is actually relatively new. It's been working for a while, but it just is live for everybody now after we released the platform last month. And the idea there is you can have a full screen view of a tool that you use that's actually, it takes over, it's still within Teams, but it takes over the entire screen, and it's an immersive experience. And that's where it's useful for things like a dashboard or maybe an aggregation across workspaces. And an example of that, we have a GitHub tab, and in GitHub there's actually no good way for you to see all the pull requests across all of your repositories, or all the issues across all your repositories. You have to kind of go one by one. That's not a feature that GitHub supports. But when we built our GitHub tab, we realized it would be fairly easy to do a small amount of incremental effort on top of the original question. Sorry. RoboForm wants me to update. Sorry. And so we created a personal tab. I'll show you an example of that when we get to the Contoso app. So what is a channel tab? So there's two required parts and one optional part. So there's a configuration page, which is used by the person who creates the tab to configure it. And you can see that to the right. So the Contoso HR tab, this is actually the screenshot. When I created that tab you saw earlier, this is how I did it. I went in and named it, and then I picked a job posting to appear. And I pressed save, and then it created what you saw earlier. And the content page is the tab itself. That's what you saw earlier. So so this is what you're looking at. Geez, it's going on its own. What you're seeing here is what I used to create what you saw in the previous slide. And last but not least, there's a removal page, which is optional. Sometimes when you delete a tab, you want to ask the user if they want to delete the underlying data. It doesn't always make sense, but we've given you given people the opportunity to do so if they like. So some tips about tabs. If you're building one, you want to minimize context switching or rather the point is to minimize context switching. Without tabs, you typically would go off to the browser and try to find the magic URL to find something. Tabs avoid that problem. And so if you think about, well, why would I build a tab? Think about, well, where do people switch context in the course of working throughout the day, and especially where people on a team might benefit from having a shared context. And so that's a great example of it. It's not always required, but it's it's ideal if you think about, well, how do people collaborate on what's in the tab? And so you can think about, oh, well, again, the recruiting tab is a great example, because people talk about interviews, they talk about candidates, they talk about what we want out of, what is in the role for a particular position and so forth. And it's designed for the bite-sized task. So it's primarily a content consumption experience, but you can do some lightweight task completion. And we say lightweight because you don't want to have a lot of you don't want to spend your life and do like a ton of work in a tab, because then it runs into some other issues around, like, well, where's the Chrome and how do I get to this, and you don't want to do too much in there. But we found that if tabs that support editing do a lot better than the ones that they get more engagement than the ones that are just used to view information. The other thing with the tab is you want to minimize extra Chrome. You want to focus on what the user does. So you can create a website tab in Teams for any arbitrary URL, but you notice when you do that, you'll get menus and toolbars and all that other stuff. And with a tab, you basically turn that off. That's actually what building the tab often entails, is you have a way of saying, okay, don't show the menu or the toolbar because it's a subset of what you would normally see in a browser window. So what are bots? Well, bots are a great way for users to interact with your app in a team conversation or in a one-on-one context. You build them using the bot framework. You can have them either be like a command line interface or via natural language. That's up to you. We recently added actionable messages. If you've seen Outlook and Teams both support actionable messages in connectors. So for example, let's say you have a Trello task that was created, or something that was, you might want to, mark a due date or make a comment on it or move it from one list to another. That's the Trello actionable messages allow you to do that. And so the idea is you can actually allow people to take some lightweight action on top of something that comes from a bot message. And so just as you can do that in a connector, we've allowed you to do that within bots as well. And here's an example of using a bot for managing job postings and applicants. When I demo this later, you'll see this. Megan Bowen has asked, well, what are the open positions? And she can use the bot to do that. Megan Bowen is the recruiter who's for Contoso. So some things about bots. What do you want to think about? So whether you use it as a command line interface or to manage workflows, you want to have an experience that takes advantage of the natural language interaction. And by that I mean, you expect the user is going to often start by saying things like help or hello. They're not going to necessarily phrase things the same way or consistently or correctly. And so having an interface that kind of responds to that kind of usage is important. We've support a rich variety of cards, and we've integrated them with tabs to complete the experience. So, for example, you can have a card can link to something that brings you to a tab, and so forth. We give you some context. If your bot can tell whether it's being used in a one-on-one context, whether, in other words, a single user is talking to the bot, or whether it's being used in a channel, and it can tell the difference. It can also tell who's on the team, and it can figure out what's the right thing to do based on the current context. I mentioned earlier that one of the things that people do is they say, one of the first things they type when they use a bot is they say help, because they want to know, well, what can this thing do and how do I do it? So we added a feature called input menus that actually allows, that basically tells users, well, what are some of the common things you can do with this, and it actually helps. You can use the menu so you don't even have to type. as the back-end bot developer, it looks just the same as if the user typed it, but it just saves the user the trouble and also tells them how to do it. So we've also extended our bot platform under the covers to support a really cool scenario that we released last month called messaging extensions. And so the idea is, the scenario that we went after with this is, we found out that a lot of conversations are about things that live in some external system. So a typical one, obviously, that we have special support for is a URL for a web page. And in that case, you type in the URL, we go crawl the web page like Facebook does, we bring back a snippet of information, maybe a picture, and so forth. But we said, hey, that's cool, but oftentimes there's other things that people collaborate on. So on the right, you can see, well, people are going to have conversations about positions and the people interviewing for those positions and so forth. And so here you can actually query for a position and get back the listing and have a conversation about it. Inside Teams, what we do every day, as you might imagine, we're always talking about, does this bug exist, or what's the work item for this feature, or whatever. And what we would do what we did before is we'd go off to a browser tab, go to Visual Studio, do a search, come back, excuse me, copy it to the clipboard, paste it to the clipboard, and anyone who wanted to look at that had to do the same thing, except for the searching part, and they may have to log in as well. So we said, why don't we allow you to search Visual Studio or anything else directly within Teams, so you can have a conversation about the work item or the bug, and that's what we did. And so the idea is you can actually wire up Teams to query any database in the world, including ones inside your own company, for this type of scenario. Recently, we added the command box, the big bar at the top. Compose extensions also work in the command bar. And so the idea is, sometimes you want to look something up without necessarily telling somebody about it. You just want to look it up for yourself. And then you may or may not want to use it in a conversation. Well, that's what this use case is for. You can actually invoke your Compose extension, look up a record, and then copy it to the clipboard to paste into a conversation if you like, or just look it up and then put it away. So some of the tips here. Again, think about returning being able to find content that makes sense in a group or a chat context, and understanding which is which if it matters. There's lots of different card types you can take advantage of. So you can have pictures, you can have just text. Just think about, well, what is it that people will want? Like for example, with bugs, you want to have a few properties of what the bug is, who it's assigned to, say, and what's its current status and so forth. And so think about what's a small amount of information that is really critical for people to be able to see. And again, the idea is many times all you have to do is look at the card to answer to find out the information you need, as opposed to going and look up the details. So there's kind of a balance between what's the proper subset to focus on. The search results, you want to keep that snappy and responsive. It supports like keystroke by keystroke autocomplete. And so the way it works under the covers is, as the user types every keystroke, we send we call your function that's registered with Teams with every keystroke, and then you respond with a set of JSON that is then rendered in our UI. So that's how it works under the covers. And so you want to have an entry point that is
advanced.
Oh, sorry. My machine is haunted. My hands are even nowhere near the keyboard, but it keeps on going ahead. Anyway, you want to make sure that that's snappy and responsive. So connectors are also shared across Teams, Outlook, and Yammer, and it's basically a way of when an event occurs in an external system, notifying people that has occurred by posting it into a channel. And again, as I mentioned earlier, users can take quick actions like commenting or selecting a set of options or setting a date or what have you. And so connectors are fully supported in Teams, and as I mentioned earlier, we've also taken many of the same features of connectors and allowed you to bots to use them as well. So one thing that is actually is in beta now, or maybe it's out of beta now, maybe it's actually in the public now, it's been in developer preview for some time, is the ability for your events from your events from your internal systems to show up in the activity feed. So if there is a notification from your own that is personally relevant from one of your internal systems, you can actually get it into the Teams activity feed. And the idea then is that you can then click on it and it will take you to more information about the event. Either a message, a bot message for it, or potentially a deep link to something in a tab. It uses the same API as sending bot messages, and it's the idea here is, like, this is an example of a personal approval request. Somebody is saying, hey, there's this position has just been posted. You need to approve the position being posted before it goes public. And so it's a way of bringing something to somebody's attention. Today, people use email for that, and we wanted to make it possible for notifications to come directly within Teams from your apps. So putting it all together, you can take all these components and build what we call a Teams app. So channel tabs, messaging extensions, connectors, personal tabs, bots in channels, or bots in one-on-one chat. You can mix and match these things, put them together in an app, and you can enhance your app over time to add or change any one of them. So, on day one, you might have something that's just a channel tab, and then, a couple weeks later, you add a personal tab, and then, after that, you add a bot, and then you can add a connector. So again, you can mix and match these things, and when you update your app, these features just light up. Last month, we also released, we're very excited about this, you created what we call the App Studio. So historically, you had to create a manifest file using Notepad or whatever, and it was pretty tedious and error prone, and it was difficult to tell whether you'd gotten it right. And so we wanted to really streamline that process. So we actually created a Teams app that is itself the App Studio. It's just an ordinary app. There's nothing special about it in terms of what it can do, but it allows you to basically have a really nice interface for filling out all this information. And also you can do things like it also lets you test how your bot or connector card will look, and there's also a web control library with UI controls, so you can make a UI that looks just like Teams, same colors, responsiveness, nice styling, and so forth, and that's integrated as well. So last last month, or I guess it was January, it's March since it's March now. What you see on the right is what the user sees in the built-in store inside Teams, and but you, as as an Office 365 administrator, can manage which third-party apps are available to your employees, and it gives you control over if and how data leaves your organization, which is something that every tenant administrator is concerned with. There's two policies that you can apply at the moment. You can enable all apps except for a disallowed set, or the converse, disable all apps except for an allowed set. And then Teams takes care of providing a graceful experience when the apps are disabled, including the case where it was enabled at one point but disabled later, but the user still may have content for it. So we handle all those cases. I will say this because it's one of our most common vehement feedback, shall we say. We have much more work to do here. We know that side loading is not sufficient. That's not a management policy. If you turn on side loading, then those policies don't work, which is another problem. So we are working very hard on improving the set of policies that govern what is available inside a company. And last but not least is the Microsoft Graph. We have you can integrate with Microsoft Graph in your Teams app. I'll come back to that in a second because that's a bit of a challenge right now. But you can do what people actually do more of is use the graph for your Active Directory profile, the Office 365 groups, emails, calendar, and documents, and so forth. We have 4 APIs in beta today. You can get a list of teams, a list of channels. You can create a channel. You can add teams to an existing Office 365 group. Those are all in beta now. We're working very hard. A big focus for 2018 is adding new APIs at a more rapid rate, and then especially making them easier to use. I was alluding to that earlier. Even though these APIs exist, they are hard to use for a number of reasons. You have to have tenant admin level approval for some of these things. The app itself actually has access to all the teams or rather, if you grant it, the app has access to all the data in all the teams the user has access to, as opposed to the one the app is installed in. So we're working with the Graph team on that. There's something called application-only, app-only access, as opposed to user-delegated access, that we're working on with the Graph team. So if there's questions on that, we can cover that at the end. But let's just say we have a lot more work to do here, and it's one of our big focuses for 2018. So I promised earlier that we had some live code. So let's switch over to the Contoso HR app and the Contoso. Let's see, right here. Okay. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, this is right now. This is a Contoso test tenant that I created, or a demo tenant. I am logged in as Megan Bowen, who's a recruiter for Contoso, and Megan is a member of a number of teams here, and such as Contoso HR and Contoso IT. So first, so she works with the IT team because she's their recruiter. So I'll come back to that shortly. But in her role as a recruiter, she's responsible for a number of positions. So I can say at Contoso HR. And right there, I can see a list of things I can do. I can get help. I can find out the set of top candidates for a given position. I can schedule an interview with a particular position. I can list the open positions. So let's start by listing the open positions. Oh, that's, yeah. And I was a bad demoer, and I forgot to wake up this app. This Contoso app is going to take a while to come back. It's running on a free tier of Azure, and it was put to sleep, so it'll take a while to wake up. Here we go. And so I can see there are, as Megan has, 5 active postings right now. Let's see, I've got a software developer 2. Senior program manager. Okay, hey, let's find out who's interviewed for this senior program manager position. See, I've got top candidates for position. There we go. And here what you're seeing is a carousel. We use an embedded carousel of positions here. So we've got Josh and Sarai and Cristobal, and those are the 3 people who have applied for this position. And so here I've got things like, see the details on this person, maybe see the person's resume, read their feedback if there's been an interview, or schedule an interview, which could integrate with Outlook or the scheduling system, and so forth. So as a recruiter, this allows me to, at a glance, without leaving teams, kind of manage what I'm, all the positions that I'm responsible for. Now, switching gears, as I mentioned, as Megan is a recruiter for the Contoso IT team, and there's other channels in here, just like you'd expect for Contoso IT. That was the Office Space video. But there's also, as I mentioned, there's a hiring channel. So actually, yeah, you can see there's a couple different tabs here. So this is the Senior Software Engineer tab, and it's exactly what you saw in the screenshot. And this is actually another position for the team, the Senior Software Engineer. Let's actually delete this and create it again. All right, so there's Contoso HR, and let's see, Senior Software Engineer, that's the one that's already there. So Software Engineer 2. And it creates the tab, just like it said, and there you go. So it's, again, fairly easy to create a tab and so forth. And let's actually, we won't go into too much detail on this, but it's worth mentioning. This window here is owned by teams, and the rectangle inside of this, you can't see the border on purpose, but this rectangle inside here is actually the code for the app. So what you do is you write what is under the covers, a little tiny mini web page that powers this experience. And then there's the SDK is used to manage it and to get the context of so the tab can find out what it's running in. There's stuff for authentication and so forth. So that's what a tab is. And so now you've seen tabs and bots. As I mentioned earlier, there's often conversations about positions. So let's see an example of that. So before I show that, here's some other examples of, let's see, so, I can look up stuff for Bing News. I can look up, let's see what Microsoft stock is trading at. There you go. Okay, so that just calls, finance, and you get a little thing like that. So there's some built-in things that are kind of useful and fun. But here's the Contoso HR app. So I can actually look up all the things that match. Actually, I don't think. And I just say, okay, here's the graphic artist, which I don't think the Contoso IT team would be hiring for it. But again, you can open up a position and have a conversation about it. Actually, maybe Megan can say, so maybe Megan doesn't know if this position, this may be a position that is created elsewhere. And maybe they're seeing if there's a need for it in IT. So again, it's a way of starting a conversation or continuing a conversation in the context of teams. Let's see. I mentioned earlier that we have this App Studio. So this is the manifest editor I talked about. I can't remember what it's called. There it is, HR package. So this is actually the definition for the app that we just saw. I open it up, and here I can see all the gory details for everything that we just saw. So here's the high-level app details, developer information, app names, the identification, all that good stuff. The description that shows up. These are the icons. You know, the full color. This is the icon that shows up in if there's a messaging extension and a few other places. This is an obscure thing, like remember in the tab, if you hover over a tab, it changes color when you hover over it. This accent color is what controls that behavior. So all sorts of low-level stuff in here. Okay, so you can dive into the particular capabilities. So this is the team tab that you saw, and then this is the personal tab, which actually we haven't shown yet. I'll come back to that in a second. But this is the candidates tab that we saw. This is the definition for the bot. This is the bot, the ID and bot framework. These are all the commands that you see. This is the connector ID. I didn't show the connector, but this is the ID for it. And the messaging extensions that you saw under the covers, there's just a single command, which is search. I didn't show this, but sometimes a compose extension needs to be customized. A good example is in Visual Studio, you can actually search within multiple projects. You can have any number of projects that you're a member of in Visual Studio. And so part of the configuration experience for a team is you can have, you log in and you pick the project that you want to search from. And then another channel or other teams can be wired up to a different experience. So that's up to you as a developer which scenarios you want to support. And once you're done, you export it and as a zip file, and then you import it within Teams. The card editor, I won't show this here, but it allows you to actually, I need to sign in on here. Okay, now I can actually let's see, hero card, say, and then I can actually see what it looks like. I go over to the conversation because under the covers it's a bot, and there's the card I just created. And if I can create a bitmap or whatever. This is the control library I was telling you about, which is pretty nice. Again, we've taken all the same styles that we use in Teams that our graphic designers have created. We've exposed that as a set of React controls. There's also a set of icons as well. Not all of which, this is based on the React library, and it even has a code editor, so you can actually see what the code is. So you can just copy and paste that into your app. And again, this is the code. We also generate code. This is C# and this is Node. So we're super excited about this. We're planning to extend this quite a bit. One of the things we'd love to do is, avoid the need to have to kind of bop back and forth between the bot framework and here, so we can actually register bots directly, et cetera, et cetera. One more thing I forgot to show. This pop-up menu is where you can access your personal apps. We just saw the Teams App Studio, but as I mentioned, the Contoso HR app also has a personal app, a personal tab. So I can ask questions of HR. I can find out my open positions here if I wanted to. But again, these are all the open candidates that I have as a recruiter. And so the idea here is I have a full screen immersive experience that is devoted to my app. So let's see. So I think that does it for the demo. If anybody, I have the Office portal open if you wanted to see the app management experience. But other than that, we can open it up for questions.
Sounds good, Bill. Does anyone have any questions that you guys want to ask? Do you want to see more on this that Bill was just talking about? No, quiet group today.
Yeah, it's a bit of silence here, but Bill, I can ask you a question for the admin of the applications, etc. When do you have any ideas on when we can deploy our own enterprise internal applications?
Yes. So one of our hi Victor. One of the big requests we've gotten is to support the ability to define apps just as you've seen, but have the concept of an enterprise app store, if you will. I'm not sure what we're really going to call it. What we're going to be doing, you know, as early as we can in 2018, we're hard at work as we speak, implementing this, is provide the ability for taking an app definition that you just saw and loading it in into a store that is unique to your Office 365 tenant. And in effect, that creates kind of your own enterprise app store. And it'll be integrated with what you see here. So right here, these apps all come from our own internal list, and which is, you know, being published to AppSource. And the idea is that there will be a place here for you to be able to see apps that are unique to your own company. But then, other than that, the experience is exactly the same. I don't know if you've mentioned it. We overhauled the side loading, what we used to call side loading, and we still do in places. Is where you upload a custom app, and so the idea here is that there'll be a UI for upload a custom app. It'll be labeled differently, but that there'll be a button that only the tenant administrator or people in a particular security group or something along those lines will see, and then they'll just use that same experience as a developer would, but instead of it just being for their own internal use, it'll be used for uploading it for the enterprise.
Okay, a couple more questions. Kent would like to know if Teams will be released to the government tenants this month.
Could you repeat the question?
Will Teams be released to the government tenants this month? So in March.
I don't know. That's the GC, what we internally call the GCC cloud. I don't know.
So we can make a note to find out.
Yeah, we can find out. I know who knows the answer, but I actually don't know what the release timeline is for our what we call the GCC cloud version.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see. Do you have any plan for the users to find public Teams and join without admin approval? But someone else also mentioned that you can already do that. Public Teams does show in the list and can be left or joined freely.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll show that here. When I say create a team, I guess I don't have any in this tenant, but when I say add a team, you will see a list of all the other teams that are public and you have access to. I I think, I can't remember what, there's another related feature which is a private team that you can see and then request access to, and I can't remember if we've implemented that or not. Unfortunately, I should maybe remove myself. Yeah.
It's going to start launching, they said, in like 3 weeks on the admin portal.
Yeah, it's very close. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, there was another question about publishing. Let's see. Can you publish, please, once more, where we as a Southwest manufacturer can easily join your developer program? Oh, that is on dev.office.com, and there is a place for programs where you can join the developer program, and I can put the URL in the IM window in just a minute. Oh, we already got that. Dev.office.com, dev program. Thanks, Vesa.
Awesome, great. Yep.
Appreciate that.
One benefit of that we use a lot is you can actually get a test tenant for a year that you can use for development, and we used a lot for that. It's great.
And then another question, what is the relationship between connectors in Teams and connectors in Office 365 groups?
So they're essentially this. Well, first of all, it's the same code. We work very closely with the connectors team, and actually have from the very beginning when their team was formed to basically unify them. A couple things that let's see. So, what are some of the differences? You can create. You can let's see. The concept of connectors. Outlook doesn't have the concept of apps, or rather they do, but they don't have a concept of packaging an Office add-in and a connector as a one unit to be installed at the same time. So that's one difference. We've exposed all the connector, some of the features in connectors from bots, as I mentioned. We haven't released this yet, and it's not exactly secret, but when you create your own connector, you have this nice embedded experience that's a configuration experience that's kind of like a tab. Or rather, it's not like a tab, or rather, when you configure a built-in connector, it's like our tabs where you have this embedded experience. When you create your own connector, currently as a third party, there's no way to have that embedded experience like a Teams tab. And so you basically launch an external browser window and configure it, and then you're done. One of the first pieces of feedback we got from people when we started talking about the ability to create your own connectors was the ability to extend that embedded experience like we have with tabs to connectors. We've been working on that for some time, yeah, that should be out relatively shortly. Believe it or not, we actually were about ready to release it in preview, and then the Spectre vulnerability came out, because you're basically talking about running cross application code, which is exactly what that exploit was about. So we actually had to take a step back and do further security review on that. But anyway, that is coming, and that'll have a really nice third-party experience that's up on par with the built-in connectors. Okay. Oh yeah, Victor's. Thank you, Victor. Yeah, please take a look at that. It's pretty cool. The
Yeoman generator.
The Yeoman generator, yeah. In fact, yeah, Victor, one of the things I want to talk about with you next week is to get that integrated into our documentation. So look forward to talking about, doing a pull request so we can, point people to that from our getting started content.
Awesome.
All right, a couple more questions. If I am invited to a team as a guest, currently I need to sign out from my org team to see updates to the guest team. When will I see my teams in one place? So yeah, the question has to do with the fact that when you switch tenants, you're a guest in one tenant, you're a member of one tenant, and you could be a guest in any number of other tenants. Or a member of any number of tenants, really doesn't matter. But to the extent that that is the case, you have to switch between them. And really what you're doing is you're restarting the app. Yeah, so
we know that's a pain point. We are working. It's really about improving our startup time, and basically we have to reinitialize everything, and we have to solve that problem. So basically we have to do a lot of internal some internal re-architecture to make sure that we can reinitialize stuff. It's kind of like what happens when you change a DLL. You have to reboot because it was never designed. You have to reinitialize everything. It's kind of a similar thing. So I guess we didn't learn.
Well, on that same topic, when will it be possible to switch between tenants in the iOS app?
Well, it is possible today, except that it doesn't work for what is it? When it's a managed device. I don't know what the timeline of that is. If you don't have managed devices, then you can switch today. But if you have managed devices, you can't. And I know this because we have managed devices, and I can't use guest access on my my iPhone either, and it's irritating. So I don't know what the answer to that is, and I can't remember if there was a dependency with the managed devices stuff or what. So that's another thing we can ask later.
Yeah. Okay. What about multi-languages like Arabic interface for Teams and custom apps?
Well, there's really two questions there. One is an Arabic version of Teams. I don't know the answer to that. I think we have 17 or 18 languages. I think Arabic is not one of them. But then there's a separate question, which is how do you have multiple languages of an app? Well, you can have an app be in any language you want, but we haven't really. There's not. You can have the app be in a different language, and you can detect what language the user is using, and so forth. But at the moment, it needs to be a little bit cleaner to be able to say, oh, there's this French and a German one, and it wires up an English, French, and German one, and it wires up to the right language at the end of the day. So, for example, those input menus you saw, those can be in any language you want, but only one at a time. There's no way to localize those.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
I just saw the question on the managed ones. My understanding was you can, because there's I know you can try. I can find out why that doesn't. What are the things that keep you from switching tenants inside the iOS app? Because the feature is there, and so it must work some of the time. And I know one of the cases it doesn't is a managed device, but maybe there's some other cases I'm unaware of.
Okay, great. And can I connect to SharePoint and OneDrive through the App Studio to present and interact with SharePoint lists to be able to submit data?
Not yet. That's a good suggestion, though.
Great. Are there any updates on when private channels within a team will be available?
I wish I had an answer to that, but I don't have. We don't have anything to announce on that. To give you some insight into behind the scenes, what's going on there, though, is so Teams, of course, has this concept of channels, but then we wire up. A team is then wired up to SharePoint and so forth. The concept of a subset of a team with a different set of users and a different set of and therefore a different set of permissions is not one that is supported across groups, and so it's not something that we can do unilaterally. So even if we could make it work within the teams and the channels themselves, that's not that hard. But we also have to make it work across SharePoint and Active Directory, because obviously when you say that that people can't see something, you have to ensure that that's actually the case. So we've been talking to the Active Directory or the Active Directory team and the groups team to figure out the right way to do that. So it is something that is still very high on our list, and we're working on it. But it is a difficult problem. it is a difficult problem to solve, but it is, again, one of our top requests, and the lack of it is very unfortunate.
Okay, one more. I can control or restrict which connectors apps are available in Teams. Does this capability exist for connectors in Office 365 groups?
No, not yet. You can turn them off entirely, but there's no way to kind of control them one by one.
Okay. And can I customize the site collection of the created SharePoint team site and apply it to all new teams, like a predefined site template?
So I think there's two questions there. One is, what about templates in Teams? And the second one is, okay, can I, to the extent that you have site collections that obviously are integrated, SharePoint site collections that are integrated with Teams, can you control that as well? You will be seeing Teams templates, before too long, I think. I think the customization, the integration of SharePoint there will come after that.
Okay. Let's see. I think I've covered everything. There was a comment that went back to the private channels that said, yes on private channels concept, especially as guest access is now out there and may not need full-blown access to all channels in a team. And that was not really just a comment.
Yes.
Any other questions, comments, feedback? We are 5 minutes after the hour, but yes, just a +1. Thank you. One more question. Where can I see all created sites?
You mean all the...
In the new SharePoint Admin Center.
Oh.
You mean the site collections, right? I guess. Yes, the SharePoint site bind. You have to go to the new SharePoint Admin Center. There you will see all group and Teams enabled sites.
Yep. Did that answer your question? Yep. Okay, perfect.
Victor knows more about SharePoint than I do, I think.
Anything else you guys want to answer? We're happy to stay on for a couple more minutes. Oh, yep. Will there be an unread box other than activity that shows all Teams channels with unread content?
Oh, you mean other than the activity feed?
Right.
I mean, if on the activity feed itself, there's actually a drop-down filter for unread, if that's what you're talking about.
Right. That would be the most. That would be the most obvious place to put it, or rather, I mean, I use that feature, fairly often myself. I'm not sure what else it would be. Maybe search, filter on search or something.
It's all about understanding the relation between SharePoint collaboration and Teams and differentiate between SharePoint and Office 365 groups.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point, Yazan. So a little bit of history there. So when Teams was built, we basically added, I mean, this is an oversimplification, but we basically added group chat, and we added group chat to Office groups. And then we added a deeper integration with SharePoint in terms of the files and so forth, with tabs and so forth. And again, that's an oversimplification, but that's kind of what Teams started out as. And but the rest of SharePoint, and obviously SharePoint, there's a lot to SharePoint, and there's site collections, and there's team sites, and all this kind of stuff. We did a lot of what we did without a lot of active involvement with the SharePoint team. I mean, they were supportive, but we were nobody. Before we were released, nobody was paying much attention to us. Now that's changed, as you might imagine. And so there is a lot of active discussions going on about how to enrich the integration between Teams and SharePoint, largely driven by customer requests and developer requests such as what you're asking for. So I don't have any answers, specific announcements right now that speaks to that, but it is something, there's a number of people both on with files integration, but also just in general, the integration between SharePoint and Teams on the developer platform as well. So there's a lot of active discussions on that, and something we're hearing a lot about and are investing in.
Yep, and one of the comments was also regarding the unread is maybe a filter on the Teams tab, and great idea. Let's put definitely put your feedback out there on user voice so we can take a look at that and figure out what we can and can't do based on what you guys are requesting. That's super important for us, and we can definitely look at that.
Yeah.
And so the link is right here, and we can provide that as well when we publish the blog on a recap of this with a link to the video, which will also be on our YouTube Office Developer channel. Yazan said, I'm dreaming to make Teams as the starting point for all collaboration and SharePoint to save informative content as an intranet.
That sounds like a great dream.
Sounds good to us.
I like that a lot.
Okay, I've got a quick one if you don't mind. It's not too much related to the developers though, but the new SharePoint tab add-in that's supposed to bring in SharePoint like news or pages themselves. I keep seeing that in demos for months and months and months, and where is that? Is it coming anytime soon?
I have seen it too, and I don't know where it is either. I can follow up on it. That's a really good question. I don't know why it hasn't been released because I've seen it in demos too. In fact, I thought it was. So yeah, we'll look into it.
Yeah, because that's a pretty big one to kind of bridge that gap between SharePoint and especially the connector that brings in the news and all that. I think that's going to be big because I don't know. I've been seeing it. I've been waiting, and it is like just kind of went in the ether, and I'm like, I don't know where it went. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. One of the weird things about being in Teams is, we have under the covers, we're running the same version as you are, but we have a bunch of switches that are turned on that turn on features that aren't released to the public, and so we never exactly know what everyone else sees. We can switch between versions. We can switch over and see what the public version is, but we almost always spend our time in the version with unreleased features because that's part of the point of living in the dog food world. Yeah, but actually, it's a little known fact. Under the covers, there's one global version of Teams. There's multiple builds, but they're not usually too far apart. But under the covers, the version of Teams actually has all sorts of, at any point in time, has all sorts of unreleased features. Which is, that's how Facebook and Facebook and other apps do that too. But yeah, it's how we basically are shipping beta code to production, and that's how we manage it.
So does your secret spin-up version of Teams have any extra notification settings yet?
Well, actually, if it did, I'm not sure I could tell you, but I don't think it does.
Yeah.
Usually those types of things tend to get a lot of attention on the team. Yeah, if there are, I'm unaware of them.
That's all right.
If I was aware of them, I couldn't say anything.
The Muta chat's been great. I'm just waiting for Muta a thread and chat channel.
Oh yeah, that's a common one. Yeah, that actually may be there. I don't know.
It's all right. We'll see it when it gets here.
Okay, any last questions before we end this call today? And again, any other feedback you have the user voice link. We will post the video within 24 to 48 hours after this call. And thank you so much for joining.
And yes, thank you so much. Yuzan was kind enough to thank us for our time, but I think we owe as much or more thanks to you for your time, because there's more of you than there are of us, and you took an hour out of your day or night to listen to this. So I am very very thankful.